The storm came down from the peaks like a living thing, swallowing the sky, bending the pines, and driving the woman to her knees before she ever saw the cabin. And by the time she reached the clearing, her dress was torn, her boots soaked, and her breath came out in ragged clouds as if the mountain itself was breathing through her. She had not meant to come this far, had not meant to trust rumors of a man who lived alone above the timberline. But desperation has a way of turning whispers into maps, and when she saw the rough-cut cabin crouched against the wind, smoke curling from its stone chimney, she cried out before she could stop herself. The door opened slowly, as if the mountain were deciding whether to answer her, and the man who stood there looked carved rather than born. Broad shoulders, wrapped in worn buckskin, beard silvered by frost, eyes dark and unreadable as deep water. She told him she would sleep in the barn, that she didn't need food or warmth, only shelter from the men who were hunting her, only one night to survive, and she said it quickly, humbly, like a prayer she didn't believe would be answered. The mountain man listened without interrupting, his gaze shifting once toward the tree line, where the storm erased all tracks, and then back to her face, pale and trembling. And when he spoke, his voice was calm but final, the kind that did not argue with the weather or the past. "There is no barn," he said, stepping aside to let her see the single-room cabin, the narrow bed against the wall, the fire burning low. "And you won't sleep alone?" Fear flashed through her, sharp and immediate, and she took a step back, insisting again, promising again. But he shook his head. Not in anger, not in desire, but in certainty. He told her the cold would kill her before dawn, that the wolves were already moving, that men tracked by fear always came louder than they thought, and that if she stayed, she would stay where he could keep her alive. The words hit her harder than the wind because they were not cruel, only true. And truth has weight when you are exhausted. Inside the cabin, the storm roared like a judge passing sentence, and she sat on the edge of the bed with her hands folded tight, every instinct screaming danger, while he tended the fire, boiled water, and handed her a blanket without touching her skin. He did not look at her the way the others had, with hunger or ownership, but with something steadier, something that felt like a locked door rather than an open one. As night deepened, she told him pieces of the truth, the failed town, the dead husband she never loved, the inheritance that made her pray, and he told her nothing of himself, except what mattered, that he owed no one, that he lived by rules older than the law, and that no harm would come to her under his roof. When the fire burned down and the cold pressed closer, he lay on the bed fully clothed, boots off but knife within reach, turning his back to her, leaving space between them like a promise kept at cost. She lay rigid beside him, listening to the storm, to his breathing, to the strange realization that for the first time in weeks, she was not alone and not afraid in the same way, and as the mountain held them both through the night, she began to understand that safety does not always feel gentle at first, and that sometimes survival wears the face of a man who will not let you choose the wrong way to live. If this story pulled you into the storm with her, subscribe now, because the mountain hasn't finished telling its secrets. Morning came pale and quiet, the storm spent, leaving the world scrubbed raw and honest, and when she woke she realized she had slept, truly slept, with dreams instead of terror, and that realization frightened her more than the storm had. The mountain man was already awake, splitting wood outside, each strike echoing through the clearing like punctuation on a sentence. She did not yet understand. Over simple food and shared silence, he explained what the mountain demanded: work, respect, truth, and patience. And as the day unfolded, men appeared at the edge of the trees, armed, tired, certain of their right to take what they wanted. The mountain man met them without anger, without fear, his presence alone enough to shift the air. And when they spoke of law and reward, he spoke of boundaries and consequence, and the mountain seemed to lean closer to hear. She watched from the cabin window, heart hammering, and saw the moment when the hunters realized that some lines were not worth crossing, that some men were not moved by money or threat. When they left, the silence felt heavier than before, and she understood that staying would change her, that leaving might kill her, and that choice was no longer simple. That night, as the fire warmed the room again, she asked him why he helped her, why he took a risk for a stranger, and he answered slowly, choosing words like stones placed across a river. He said the mountain had taken enough from him, that he would not let it take her too, and that sometimes The hardest thing a man can do is stand between the world and someone who still believes tomorrow can be better. The space between them felt smaller now, not because of touch, but because of trust earned the hard way. And when she lay beside him again, she understood that sleep next to me had never meant possession. It had meant protection, responsibility, and the quiet courage to stay awake when another life depends on you. As dawn hinted at the horizon, she knew she would not be the same woman who climbed this mountain in the storm, and that whatever waited below, part of her would always belong to this place where survival taught her the shape of strength and kindness taught her how to breathe again. If you want more stories where danger, honor, and slow burn love collide, hit subscribe now. Your next unforgettable story is already waiting. The mountain did not give answers easily, but it always revealed the truth in time, and by the third morning she understood that staying was no longer an accident. It was a decision that would shape the rest of her life. The sun climbed slowly over the ridgeline, painting the snow-dusted peaks gold, and she stood outside the cabin wrapped in his spare coat, breathing air so cold and clean it felt like a confession. Behind her, the mountain man worked in silence, repairing a broken trap line, his movements steady and unhurried, as if time itself bent to his rhythm. She realized then that he lived differently from anyone she had ever known, not running from the past, not chasing the future, but standing firmly in the present, ready for whatever came. That calm began to change her, sanding down the sharp edges of fear that had ruled her for so long. But peace never lasted long on the mountain, and before midday the ravens began to circle, their cries sharp and warning, and the dogs stiffened, ears high, sensing what she could not yet see. The mountain man looked up once, eyes narrowing, and told her quietly to go inside and bar the door. She obeyed without question, her trust now instinctive, and from the cabin window she saw movement between the trees, men again, more of them this time, riding hard, anger replacing greed. They had not given up. They had followed the trail higher, convinced that no man lived beyond their reach, and as they dismounted, rifles in hand, she felt the old fear claw back into her chest. But the mountain man did not retreat. He stepped forward into the clearing alone, broad shoulders squared against the threat, and spoke first, his voice carrying with a calm authority that made even armed men hesitate. He told them they were trespassing, that the mountain kept its own law, and that he would not warn them again. They laughed at first, sharp and nervous, but when he did not move, did not raise his weapon, did not flinch, something shifted. Men who live by force recognize strength when they see it, and they saw it in the way he stood like a boundary made flesh. Words turned to threats, threats turned to raised rifles, and in that frozen moment she realized what he had risked by letting her stay, that his solitude was a shield, and she was the crack in it. The first shot never came. Instead, the mountain answered, a low rumble rolling down the slope as snow loosened above them, a warning older than language. The men faltered, glancing upward, and that was all it took. The mountain man stepped closer, voice low and deadly calm, and told them to leave while they still could. This time they listened. When the riders disappeared back into the trees, fear draining away like melting ice, she sank to the floor inside the cabin, shaking not from cold but from the weight of what had almost been lost. He came in quietly, checked the door, then finally looked at her, not with blame, not with regret, but with something like resolve. She apologized through tears, telling him she would leave, that she would not bring danger to his door again, and for the first time, his voice softened in a way that broke her more than anger ever could. He said the mountain chose who stayed, and it had not sent her away yet. That night the fire burned brighter, the silence deeper, and when she lay beside him again, closer than before, she felt the truth settle in her bones. This was no longer just about survival. It was about belonging, about two wounded lives finding balance in a place that demanded honesty above all else. Outside, the mountain stood watch, ancient and unmoving, and inside, something fragile and powerful took root. Trust born not of words, but of actions that could not be taken back. If this chapter made your heart race and pulled you deeper into the mountain's grip, subscribe now, because the next chapter will test everything they've built, and the mountain never gives without taking something in return.